A mystery tour in Taiwan. What's behind a US delegation visit shrouded in secrecy? Common ground on climate. Two rival superpowers come together to put environment before politics. Jailed for chanting slogans. With another national security trial in Hong Kong, we speak to an exiled activist on how the city's freedoms are shrinking. Talks of relaxing quarantine restrictions, but will there be enough room for those returning home for the holidays? A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. On day two of an unannounced visit to Taiwan, the visiting US delegation toured the heart of Taiwan's technology industry, Hsinchu. Taiwan and US officials have remained tight-lipped on the details of the trip. The group of lawmakers and defense officials arrived on a military aircraft late on Tuesday, but Beijing has said it could undermine the US-China relationship ahead of a rare meeting between leaders Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. Rick Glowett has this report.
A visit shrouded in mystery. Nearly 48 hours after a delegation believed to include US senators and military officials arrived in Taiwan, everyone is keeping tight-lipped about the trip. On Wednesday's agenda, a visit to the Ministry of Defense. Piquing suspicion that the trip could relate to cooperation between the US and Taiwan military. It comes as the world wakes up to China's new military prowess, flagged by Taipei in this week's biennial military report. The Ministry of National Defense also warned that Beijing is stepping up its grey zone tactics, which includes cyber and cognitive warfare. But clues to the significance of this week's surprise visit may be found overseas. China, angry at any cooperation between Taiwan and its allies, has ramped up its rhetoric, threatening Taiwan's so-called separatists and those that collude with them.
中方对此坚决反对，已向美方提出严正交涉，要求美方立即停止与台开展任何形式的官方往来，不向台独分裂势力发出任何错误信号，以免严重损害中美关系和台海和平稳定。
It's a tried and tested tactic for the Chinese Communist Party, keen to isolate a country they claim as their own despite never having ruled it.
So what they tend to do then is to use relatively firebrand or relatively hardline rhetoric to criticize all these moves from US side or other Western liberal democratic like-minded countries. The natural logic is for them to show overreaction and negative reaction in the hope that that will make other actors think again next time they're thinking about voicing more support for Taiwan. So it's a preventive measure. It's kind of a preventive deterrent.
But the US maintains that support for Taiwan remains rock solid. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the US and other allies would take action if Taiwan was attacked, in a forum organized by the New York Times. But the US has never officially stated it would defend Taiwan.
Dual deterrence means by keeping it ambiguous whether US will intervene in a Taiwan Strait crisis, US can, one, deter Beijing from launching an invasion of Taiwan, because you may worry that US will intervene in that scenario. But it can also, two, deter Taiwan from perhaps pursuing international space at too fast a pace, at a pace that's not comfortable to other friends and partners.
Joe Biden and Xi Jinping are set for a rare meeting as early as next week. The two superpowers have clashed on a number of issues, from trade to human rights and security. But one of the most delicate issues for Washington would be how to maintain the balance between Beijing and Taipei. Patrick Chen and Rick Glowett for TaiwanPlus.
Preparations are underway for the official unveiling of Taiwan's advanced fighter jet squadron, the first of its kind in the world. 4 F-16V fighter jets streaked through the sky above Chiayi in southern Taiwan on Wednesday, ahead of an official unveiling ceremony next week. The upgrade to Taiwan's Air Force means it will be the first in the world to have a combat-ready fleet of F-16V fighter jets. These aircraft are not new, but retrofitted with the latest high-tech sensors and other equipment. A total of 141 active F-16s will eventually receive the upgrade. Beijing and Washington are at loggerheads over many issues, but they have found some common ground on the climate crisis. At the COP26 summit in Glasgow, the two sides have said they will work together to reduce emissions this decade. Louise Watt reports.
With 2 days to go until the end of the UN climate conference in Glasgow, a flurry of activity and a surprise deal between China and the US. China's climate envoy, Xie Zhenhua, on his way to announce that the world's 2 largest carbon emitters have agreed to do more to reduce emissions this decade. This includes tackling methane emissions, protecting forests, and working to phase out coal power.
在气候变化领域，中美双方共识大于分歧，具有广泛的合作潜力。在离格拉斯哥大会结束还有2天，我们希望此份联合声明能够为大会的成功做出中美的贡献。
The announcement was unexpected given the current tensions between China and the US over trade, human rights, and Taiwan. But in Glasgow, the two sides said they had agreed to boost cooperation on climate action, including sharing technology to reduce emissions.
Out of this cooperation, we expect acceleration of the rate of reduction. And the only way you get it is by sharing technology, working together, sharing climate technology.
The US climate envoy, John Kerry, said the agreement commits to a series of actions not just in the long term, but in the next few years.
And I'm pleased to announce that we will work together to limit methane. Methane emissions, a greenhouse gas up to 80 times more destructive, more potent than CO2.
This marks the first time that China has committed to reducing its methane emissions, linked largely to the country's massive coal industry. Beijing has said it will phase out coal starting from 2026, but it didn't specify by how much or when it hopes to end coal power altogether. Both sides have nevertheless billed the agreement as a way to give impetus to the climate talks as a whole. Environmental activists say the talks have so far fallen short of what is needed to avert a climate disaster. The EU climate policy chief welcomed the move by China and the US.
That's good news. It's really encouraging to see that those countries who were at odds in so many areas have found common ground on what is the biggest challenge humanity faces today. It shows that also the US and China know this subject transcends other issues, and it certainly helps us here at COP to come to an agreement.
Representatives from almost 200 countries have until Friday to produce an agreement on capping global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Based on countries' current emissions pledges, that goal is still out of reach. James Rayner and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Demonstrators dressed in outfits from the hit Netflix series Squid Game staged a protest at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Protesters took aim at the South Korean electronics giant Samsung, calling for the company to stop funding coal projects and transition to 100% renewable energy. The protest included a person dressed as Samsung Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong, whom activists in guard outfits pretended to assault and detain. Quarantine restrictions are making it difficult for many Taiwanese living overseas to plan a trip home for the Lunar New Year holidays in January. But with more people getting vaccinated, the government is considering relaxing the current rules. As Sandy Chi reports, it still may not make it easier for people to return home.
Sorry, Mom. I don't think I can make it back home for New Year's this year.
It's what parents in Taiwan don't want to hear, that the pandemic could prevent their kids returning home for the Lunar New Year holidays. Taiwan's government is hoping to allay such fears with a partial relaxation of entry requirements. Right now, all travelers arriving in Taiwan have to quarantine for 14 days. But that will be eased to a 10+4 quarantine plan to cater the large number of overseas Taiwanese returning for the holidays between December 14th and February 14th next year. 10+4 means 10 days of quarantine at a hotel or government-run facility, plus 4 final days at home. Now there's a talk of easing that even further to a 7+7 plan, 1 week at a quarantine facility followed by 1 week at home, to help free up more quarantine hotel rooms.
有关7+7的方案的部分，现在都还在跟各个部会这边在协调当中。那预计这个礼拜会有比较确定啊。
If the plan is approved, it will likely only apply to people who have been fully vaccinated with approved vaccines. Meanwhile, there are further signs of opening up the retail sector. Supermarkets can allow people to sample food again, and customers in department stores will be able to try out makeup and skincare products. In the next 2 weeks, the government will also decide whether to allow children aged 12 to 17 to get a second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The first such rollout was halted in September after cases of adverse reactions. Taiwan has also shown interest in buying the new COVID treatment pills from American drug maker Merck. The UK last week became the first country to approve the use of the drug. The pill still needs emergency use authorization in Taiwan. Another experimental drug, Pfizer's Paxlovid, is also being considered. Damon Lin and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, it's Singles Day. We'll tell you how many shoppers are heading to the checkout without a single item. Stay with us.
"今天台湾人要了解的是，我们跟这片土地关系里面，它是跟你的生命的根源息息相关。像这个红块、扁柏等等，他们都是台湾的神明。长期以来，我一直误以为我在抢救山林，直到最近10年来，我才了解，我从来没有抢救山林。 而是山林从来在抢救我们。我们的地球46亿年来，我们就是它的一部分，它就是我们共同的灵魂，流传在我的血液中，也流动在树叶当中。
这是我们台湾人要送给台湾的礼物。
我们都清楚，我们都在一起，在完成一件事情。
这是我们的根。
我
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Let's take a look now at some of the other news making headlines around the world. A Hong Kong activist is set to be sentenced in the first speech crime conviction under new laws imposed by Beijing. Ma Chun-man, a protester known as Captain America, was convicted earlier this month of inciting secession, a new crime under the controversial national security law. Ma had chanted the popular protest slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong," and called for the territory's independence. Ma is the second person to be sentenced under the national security law and the first to be convicted solely for criminalised speech. For more on the situation in Hong Kong, our reporter Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick spoke to former lawmaker and activist in exile, Nathan Law. He asked whether the Beijing imposed law has left any space for opposition to the government.
Being involved in politics, if you're critical to the government, you have to be very careful because the national security law criminalizes dissent and actions that are critical towards the government. No matter you are protesting, you are being involved in politics, participating in primary, or even having organizations like trade unions, like teachers union, or even your organizations that helps the inmates and also their families. These are being seen as subversive force and either being jailed or disbanded under the pressure of the Chinese government.
And do you think that there's a special role for people like yourself now, people who are abroad, either exiles or diaspora?
Well, definitely, we've got a lot of responsibility on our shoulder. We have to help preserving Hong Kong's culture, Hong Kong's identity. These things are the important characteristics that Beijing tries to wipe off in Hong Kong society. We need to be connected to the international community and continue to voice for Hong Kong people, because Hong Kong people now, they cannot speak. They're basically silenced when they wanted to, let's say, to talk about how we can hold Chinese government accountable. And also we need to support like-minded allies like Taiwan, like many others in the military alliance. And we needed to fight for our diaspora community needed to fight for recognition and representation in order to remind the world that please keep your eyes on Hong Kong, and also Hong Kong as a very important place of the whole battle in between authoritarianism and global democracy. We need to make sure that it is not forgotten.
A court in Thailand ruled on Wednesday that protesters demanding reform of the country's monarchy violated the constitution, saying their actions amount to calling for the overthrow of the government. The Constitutional Court was ruling against 3 student activists who led pro-democracy protests both this year and last. They had taken to the streets to demand the resignation of the Prime Minister, amendment of the Constitution and reform of a strict royal defamation law. The ruling could lead to treason charges being brought against the trio. An American journalist detained in Myanmar since May now faces new charges of sedition and terrorism, according to his lawyer. Danny Fenster was arrested while attempting to leave Myanmar after the military seized power in February. Fenster was a managing editor of an independent news site. US officials have been trying to secure his release. And on Wednesday, people crowded the streets in a flash mob-style protest in the country's largest city, Yangon. It's become a more common form of demonstrations against the junta after large-scale protests were violently shut down by the military. The United Nations Security Council on Wednesday issued a rare joint statement expressing concern over the growing level of violence in the country. NBA player Kanter is again making headlines for challenging Chinese taboos, this time saying Taiwan will never surrender to China. In a tweet, the Boston Celtics center showed off his new shoes that say, "Stand with Taiwan," and "Taiwan belongs to the Taiwanese people." The sneakers also had images of handcuffs breaking, together with the words independence and democracy. The NBA has been careful about raising issues that China considers sensitive, fearing a backlash from the lucrative Chinese market. But in the past few weeks, Kanter has also spoken out in solidarity with Hong Kong, Uyghurs and Tibetans. Here in Taiwan, today is expected to be one of the largest online shopping days of the year. Known as Singles Day, millions of consumers will log on to online stores in the hopes of securing the year's best bargains. But as our reporter Jaime Ocon explains, supply chain problems and competition could snag you out of a deal.
Minutes before the start of the year's best online bargains went live, I was poised to buy an iPad. But within seconds of the launch, I received error messages like these. The retail site I was on crashed, and I never even made it to checkout. Turns out there was too much traffic on the platform. This is the madness of Singles Day. It's one of the biggest shopping events in Asia, where millions of consumers take to the web to get the best bargains for the hottest products. The fact that it happens on the 11th of November is no accident. This date was originally chosen because of the number 1. It resembles a bare stick and is actually slang in Chinese for an unmarried man who does not add branches to the family tree. 4 number 1s, 4 lonely sticks, a way of celebrating singlehood. Chinese retail giant Alibaba is credited with turning the unofficial holiday into an online shopping bonanza. Last year, its total value of orders across its shopping platforms rang in at $74.1 billion over the first 11 days in November. And predictions are that sales are going to be even bigger this year. But a few factors could prevent that from being the case. For one, China has increased regulation on large online platforms as part of its efforts to create what it calls a more civilized internet. That could mean curbs on how much platforms are able to bombard customers with marketing messages. And it might make a dent in their ability to attract customers away from other retail sites. Then there's the pandemic-related issues to consider, like disruptions to global supply chains and chip shortages. Even here in Taiwan, delivery of the latest iPhone and MacBook have been delayed for weeks. So as millions of customers will try their luck at getting the day's best deals, many might experience the same result that I did last night. As of now, the site is back up and running, but many things are already sold out. Perhaps this is in line with the spirit of Singles Day, coming up single-handed. Kamashu and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
Now imagine having to deal with climate change without your morning coffee. Global warming is expected to have a significant impact on coffee production, and it's a reality that a group of Finnish scientists are waking up to. Researchers have taken production from the fields to the lab, culturing plant cells in bioreactors. The new method would also use less pesticides and fertilizers while reducing the need to transport beans around the world. Now, it may sound like a great solution, but what about the flavor? Is the lab-made stuff as good as traditional coffee?
Not like, of course, 100%. It tastes a combination of different types of coffees, but of course we are not there yet with the commercial variety. But it certainly does resemble coffee at the moment.
And now a journey into how different cultures use colours in their art, explained by the experts at Taiwan's National Palace Museum.
我们在学习色彩的时候，其实基本上会先提到3个基本的颜色，叫做红、黄、蓝，逐渐的稀释变化的处理融合，就变成为所谓的12色相环。每个人对于色彩的喜好偏好也会有所不同，那么也会因为文化的差异，在色彩的使用上。 的整个是白色的底，所以才让这个颜色凸显出来，也让这个主题更加的明确。那么它所烧制出来的颜色就非常是符合真实的母鸡、公鸡的色彩，所以这色彩的运用完全就是跟真实是吻合的。那么可是，在烧制的技术，颜料经过很高的温度，如何能够确实掌握，这就是艺术家非常了不起的地方，非常精致，才能够达到这样的一件作品。
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with aerial drone images of a shrinking Swiss glacier because of climate change. Check out TaiwanPlus News on YouTube and the website for this show and more. Stay safe and see you next time.